Sorry about earlier. I had to cut up like between an explanation because my computer was running low on battery. So a little recap: we were talking about inheritance and how it's it's like getting transferring what you have on your superclass, inheriting, like the word implies, to your subclass. So like trespassing all of those variables, function, and everything, plus adding something extra to it. So like I was saying, I created my student class subclass, and to implement, you need to extend your member class. And then I created like it's gonna have the same variables as the member class, which is string, a name, string name, an age, and in an integer, and also gender as a string. And for this one, plus that, I included two extra items so far, which is a GPA and a ID, double and int. And to do, and also it's a new class, so you also need to add a constructor already, like a constructor which takes in the name and then takes in the age, gender, GPA, and ID. And as a as to use, because you extended the member is a subclass, we use with super, which is like a constructor for this one, calling the constructor. And also we're setting up the GPA and the ID. Fairly straightforward. And to declare a student, we use student, and let me call it student 1, just like previously as we did before. New student, now calling the constructor. Here the age, and then we said it was the GPA, so 3.5, and also 90, 20, 20, 30, 40. So as we see, we didn't declare the new variables. Rather, it's taken from this from the class. It's taking those values and transferring over to the subclass, from our super class to our subclass. So that's the inheritance. It's fairly simple. You don't have to read too much into it. Just like know a little bit of how it works and how to define them, declare them, and also don't remember to use extend in order to define, like, this is a subclass you're telling it, or you're expanding that superclass. Now we're gonna go to overloading. So overloading, the definition says, is a feature that allows a class to have more than one method having the same name. If their arguments list are different, it allows a class to have more than one constructor having different argument lists. So how I like to look about it is overloading, like you overload, so you put more than intended, or like you're stacking them, like you're doing it more times, like over and over again. So to do that is like, let's say we want a function to be able to just update the GPA or the ID, but we want to use the same name to create that overload. So it's gonna be a void because it's not gonna return anything, and we're just gonna call it an update. And so this is gonna be our template, and we obviously want to update. So, or let's do GPA first equals. So this one's gonna take a GPA as a double, so it needs to take a double x. So GPA is gonna take the value of x. So this is our first function. So if we copy paste, obviously it's gonna give us an error because we already defined this function once, and you can't define it twice. But here's where the overloading function happens. It says different, like the definition said, different parameters. So if this, instead of being a double, it's an int, it wouldn't give me the error that was giving me earlier. but as we know, double is a GPA is a double. So now we wanna, whenever we use integer, we want to the ID to be updated. So whenever the update function is used with an integer, it's gonna update the ID. And whenever the update function, same name, only different parameters, when the parameter is a double, it's gonna update the GPA. This is what overloading is. We could also do the same thing over here, similar. So boy, let's, instead of calling it update, let's use set, just to like keep another different example. So set is gonna be, if it's an integer for set, we want to update, set the age to that one, to that variable. And if we do it with the string, with string and another string, we want to update the first one being the name and the second one gender. Sorry, needs to be capital. So as you can tell, it doesn't only need to be one variable, it could be multiple, but the parameters has to be different. So this one's taking an integer, and here it's taking two. It could be taking two integers. Let's say if we have age and also, I don't know, phone number, it could also be taking two integers, and it's gonna be two different functions because you're overloading that function. You're not you're, it's like defining it twice, but depending on the argument, it's gonna do different things. That's overloading at its basic. It's fairly straightforward. It's not that complicated. So here, the next topic we're gonna talk about is overriding. So overriding is a feature that allows a subclass or child class to provide a specific implementation of a method that is already provided by one of its superclasses or parent classes. Uh, Basically is taking that same function that is already declared on your parent function and rewriting it, overriding it, changing what it does. So whenever it's called, it's gonna do that override over like rewritten function. So let me show you a simple example. So as we know, we have our display function over here, and what it does, it display a name, an age, and a gender. So what if we define the same name, that same function, same name display, and instead of displaying only those three, it's gonna display also the ID and the GPA as well. So we wanted to display GPA, and also ID. So ID. So technically, when we call the display function, if it's a student, it's gonna display this. So let's go over here on our main. So we already declared our first student. So if, like we saw earlier, if we do the display for our member we created, it's gonna display these three variables that we had previously defined. And if we do it with student one dot display, same name as we said before, and we run it, instead of it's gonna show us all 5 items so far. So these 3 were from the superclass, the name, the age, and the gender, and these 2 last items are from within the subclass, which is the GPA and the ID. Not that complicated. It's just like knowing that you can rewrite functions you already had defined previously on your superclass. Simple. So polymorphism. The definition for this is the ability of an object to take on many forms. The most common use of polymorphism in OP occurs when a parent class reference is used to refer to a different class child class object. So as the word imply, polymorphism is like different ways or different taking different shapes per se. This is implying to our previously defined overriding and overloading. Um, so overriding is like taking overloading is like taking different depending on the variable given is gonna do different things, but in the core is the same function being updated. It's just taking different forms per se because it operates different depending on the parameters, and also the display depending if you're in the student, it takes a different form. Instead of displaying only three as previously shown in this class, instead of showing these three on the subclass, it's gonna take another form, the display function, and instead of displaying just those three, it's gonna display those five. So that's polymorphism. So overloading, overriding. So now to abstract. So data abstraction is a process of hiding certain details and showing only essential information to the user. Abstraction can be achieved by either abstract classes or abstract interfaces. The way I like to think about it is like the skeleton, but for the class, or it's like it's implying that this this wants to do. It's like telling the class that this function is gonna do this, but you still have to define it earlier in the class, like the actual depending on the class which takes that function, depending on the class what it's gonna do. I'm also gonna read the definition of interface, which is fairly similar to abstract, a little bit different. So an interface is a completely abstract class that is used to a group related method with empty bodies. So this is specifically a class. An abstract could be a class or a function. Like right now, I'm gonna do an interface class because that's the only way it can be. Like it says here, and an instead of and having an abstract class within it. So let's do it. To create, right click, new, and below class it's interface. So let me get a interface got get role. So on the core, I want this function I wanted to do is to get the role depending if it's a student, it's gonna tell me it's a student, or if it's a staff member, it's gonna tell me it's a staff member. I'll do it right now. So public, and then that's the art interface. It's gonna be just like the blueprint for the class to take in. So public, and then abstract role. Yeah, it's not gonna return anything, sorry. So it's this function at its core, it's gonna just display the role, so that's why it's called role. But we do need to implement that on our class. So in this class, we're gonna do boy role, and what this is gonna do is let me just create a new variable. So it's gonna be let's make it a string again, string, and a row. So that one so whenever we create one, we want a row to be set to student. So whenever it's role it's called, we want to display system that out that println role plus a row. There you go. but for this one we need to implement. So extend implement get role. So now we're implementing the get role. We need to make it public though, because in order to be accessed from other classes, we make it public just like to avoid any constrictions that it could have. So we have our role. It's gonna display the role over here, but in order to fulfill like this one, we want to create, I'm gonna create quickly another class so you can see it. So we already have our student, which is that subclass. Well, I want another subclass, which is gonna be the staff. So let's add the constructor, might as well. And this one's gonna take instead of role, we're gonna add a string position, and also it's gonna implement that interface we had created, get role, which is for us to display the role. So our get role is gonna implement, so whenever it's called so far, and it's gonna set the position. Let's just do an average one, we can fix it later. So professor, so that's gonna be whenever you create one. So public void or row function, just gonna display that print ln. We want it to display row rather than or row, which is gonna be, no, let's just, instead of putting row, because we already did it on the student, we're gonna put position, and that one's gonna say position, and that one's gonna display our position. Oh, typo. So yeah, this is like the main core or what of interfaces, like skeleton of a function that we need to still implement on our subclasses or class, our superclasses or subclass. So like this one, we know for sure we need to implement a role function that we intuitively know that it's gonna display the role of each object we create. So in this case, we could make it more complicated and create like position, a constructor that takes in a position depending on, because it could be a professor or a receptionist or anything other than that, and also modify the student so it could take up a role. We could be freshman, sophomore, junior, high, senior, or anything like that. But for simplicity and time, we're just gonna keep it like this. Very kind of difficult to grasp at first, but once you understand it, it's not that difficult. And finally, encapsulation. I kind of like this one. So the definition for this one is encapsulation in Java is a mechanism of wrapping the data, variables, encoding actions of the data, methods together in a single unit. In encapsulation, the variables of a class will be hidden from other classes and can be accessed only through the methods of their current class. So for this one, we have an update function, which is like accessing their GPA, but we don't want anyone else to directly access the GPA, and that's something that it's not supposed to. So for that one, we can encapsulate, as we said before, which is like putting it all together or hitting the informations so that people that are not supposed to access won't do it. So we can do it private, so no one can directly access GPA now. The only way to do it, it's through update. And here you can put a lot of parameters. So over here you can put check that is not above 4.0, so people don't go, oh, I'm gonna just put a 5 or something like that. It's higher, so people cannot access that directly. You can put a for loop, so it checks like if it's above 4 or below 0, don't accept that number, that is not allowed. And it's on private, so they cannot access the GPA variable directly. It has to go through that update function, which is gonna have a check, so people don't input anything that is not allowed. So that's gonna be everything for me. I did a really simple program, but I think overall it gets like to the point. It's not that complicated to look at or understand, and also the simplicity of it is makes it easier to understand while I was going through, rather than creating a really complicated program and going through it. I know this uh, program could have a lot of complicated things, a lot of improvements as I've talked about it, such as modifying the position, also adding more so to the stuff like salary maybe, or like office hours or anything like that, creating more private so people can access those like IDs. We don't want people messing with the IDs, having some checks such as the GPA or a calculator that actually gets the GPA and can update it depending on the grades you get and stuff like that. But for the point of explaining it, I think a simple program will do the job better than rather than making it super complicated. I think you guys liked this video and it was helpful. Thank you. Have a good day.